Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. You might be able to see me too. I am screen sharing right now. At least that's what my laptop's telling me. This is Gabrielle O'Neill, UC Lake County Master Gardener. And we're going to be talking about vegetable garden planning today, specifically about vegetable garden planning in Lake County. Because things are a little different here than in a lot of other places. It's very much about timing. I am gonna get into a lot of nitty-gritty things here. This will be a recorded presentation, so obviously I cannot take any live questions right now, but I imagine it's gonna go on it is for the Tribal Health Consortium. It will go on their YouTube channel. And you can certainly ask your questions there, and I will be happy to answer them if they haven't already been answered in the presentation here. So let me see, make sure this all works properly. Okay. We're on to our first slide. I have this presentation to give you something to look at and to remind me of all the things that I want to talk about. I may not slavishly stick to that, but it's a good place to start. So when you plan your spring garden, if you are a beginning gardener especially, you want to think about where do you want to plant a vegetable garden. And there's a lot of places in Lake County that are not terribly suitable for that, but you can make it work if you pay attention to a few things. Ideally, you want to have a level, sunny area. There's a lot of oak woodland here. My property, for instance, is in an oak woodland. And when we first moved there, everything was under oaks. Now, in the course of 15 years, a lot of oaks have fallen, and there is actually some level sunny areas. So that is one of the main requirements for a lot of the summer vegetables. They want to have ideally 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. And the reason why you do not want to plant under oaks is also because most of the oaks in Lake County do not want water in the summer. They are very susceptible to oak root fungus. And if you plant a vegetable garden right underneath the drip line or close to the drip line of your mature oaks, this garden will get watered all summer long. The water will percolate down through the beds and keep that root zone of the oaks continuously moist, which will create and encourage oak root fungus. And your oaks are slowly going to die. So if you must plant under oaks, because that's the only space you have, I would recommend planting in containers. I have done that for many years and still do in half wine barrels. That works really well. Number one, because that way the water stays largely in the barrel and doesn't keep that soil underneath moist. And number two, the oak roots, and number two, gophers don't get into wine barrels, which is a real plus where I live. And the oak roots will take at least a year to get through the drainage holes into those wine barrels, which means you can move barrels to a slightly different spot the next year and avoid that. So that was the first point. Where do you want to plant? You ideally want to have well-drained soil. That can be a real issue in Lake County. We have a lot of heavy clay soils that are not well-drained. In some instances, they can be amended sufficiently to mitigate that problem. If your soil is so bad that it cannot be amended, which was the case for me, then I just started with raised beds and I purchased a few truckloads of soil. I know not everybody can afford that, but starting with some containers with ideal soil is another option. You want your soil to be fertile and friable. Now, again, this is an ideal case scenario. The only places in Lake County that have fertile, friable soil are Upper Lake and Scotts Valley. They have ideal soil. However, they have other things to deal with, such as Scotts Valley has the coldest climate in Lake County, the latest and the earliest frost. So while they have ideal soil, they have a lot of other issues. Another thing you want is you want your vegetable garden to be near or with an adequate water supply. I know that was a little iffy in the first tribal health community garden, where the water side was actually across the parking lot. It was a little challenging to get that to the garden. It can be done, but make sure you have water supply, because our climate is unforgiving and summer vegetables, for the most part, need to be watered every day. So water is super critical. Like I said, if your soil is not ideal, here you can see in my little picture, the option is to plant in raised beds or containers. And you can see in that picture, your average raised bed on the top left here, it can be anywhere from 4 inches above ground to 2 feet above ground, depending on, number one, what you want to plant, how deep the root system of that specific crop is, and number two, what these raised beds are resting on. If they are on soil, even if it's not ideal soil, just the fact that there is a raised bed on top of that soil will improve the soil underneath, and the roots of your crop will eventually also access that soil underneath the bed. So if you have soil underneath, your bed doesn't need to be quite as high. However, if you put your raised bed upon gravel, concrete, asphalt, anything like that, or on rock, which is the case in a lot of cases in Lake County, then you want to have it as high as the anticipated root system of whatever crop you're growing. In the case of lettuce, for instance, that doesn't need to be more than 1/2 foot. But if you're growing any type of root crop or a summer vegetable with a big root system, such as tomatoes, ideally you want it 2 feet deep. At least 18 inches. 18 inches is about the recommendation. Smaller containers, now a raised bed like that is really a form of container in the broad sense. Smaller containers are, like I mentioned before, what I have used a lot in the past. Oak wine barrels. I actually use mostly half barrels, because you don't need the root depth of a whole wine barrel. And that wine barrel in the picture, that's kind of a specific use of that wine barrel for strawberries, which works really well. But for most crops you grow in there, actually a half wine barrel will be ideal. On the right bottom, you see these commercially available, they're called grow box, I believe. And it is a sub-irrigated planter. So not really self-watering in the true sense, but there's a water reservoir at the bottom. So even though that planter is fairly small, it has a water reservoir that is important on hot summer days. So you don't have to water them twice a day, which you would otherwise have to do with a small container like that. The little pots on the right top are something that will only work in Lake County in the winter. You can see most of them are clay pots. They evaporate water really quickly. So if you would try to grow anything in a pot like that in the summer, it would have to be watered probably twice a day. So not really practical or workable in our summer climate, but can be done really well in our winters, especially during the wet periods. This is a place where you can grow herbs. As you can see in the picture, an ideal place for a few herbs. Now, the light requirements are a thing that, hi, Louise. Louise is checking in. I'm only on the second or third slide, Louise, so you haven't missed much. So can you hear me? Good, good, good. So the light requirements are important. In the winter, in a winter garden, that's usually easy because most of our oak trees, our deciduous trees, shed their leaves in the winter. So there's always usually plenty of light. But in the summer, these oak trees have leaves And so you have to figure out before you plant which areas in your garden are going to be shaded when. You can see in that little diagram on the right, in the winter, the sun's a lot lower. So the light and shade is going to be different in the winter than in the summer. That is not an issue. Most of that is not an issue at all for leafy greens and, lettuce, kale, any of the leafy greens. They can actually get along with 3 to 4 hours of sun per day. And especially in the summer, they do much better if they only have a half a day of sun instead of a whole day of sun. But since we're probably going to be preparing for the summer garden right now, your summer vegetables want ideally 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. And so it is a good idea to map your shade in your garden before you get started planting. On this little diagram, you can see on the top left how you do that. You basically make a page, you divide it in the different areas of your garden, and then you take a day when you have not many other things to do, and you observe which areas are in the sun or in the shade at which time of the day. When you look at that diagram, it goes from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. and it has 4 distinct areas of the garden that person is planning to plant. And after a day of observing, you can tell which areas are in the sun when and which areas are in the shade when. And that will determine what you can plant there. Like I said, in the winter, it's usually a non-issue because all the leafy greens, they'll do fine with all day, very little light. In the summer, this is a really important thing to do. So it's well worth taking a day and doing that instead of wasting an entire crop of tomatoes when you figure out that these tomatoes don't get more than 2 hours of sun a day. The other thing to consider is the hardiness zones. Now there is the USDA hardiness zones and the sunset zones. The USDA hardiness zones for Lake County go anywhere from 8 to 8B. So there's like 3 little distinct different hardiness zones. And depending on where you are in Lake County, I actually like to look at it as microclimates. Depending on where you are in Lake County, you can get away with certain things or not, such as, for instance, growing Meyer lemon trees or not. Meyer lemon is the hardiest citrus tree. Now, we're not going to go a lot into fruit trees today. We're talking mainly about vegetables, but I just wanted to mention that because that's one of the things where it really depends in which hardiness zone you are. The sunset zones are a little more general. So Lake County overall is in the sunset zone 7. And that I find is a really reliable indicator when you go buy plants. Very often on the little tag there, it will tell you which sunset zone these plants are going to be good for. And so anything that works for zone 7 is going to work in Lake County, basically. So that is a good general ballpark figure. Now, of course, as I briefly mentioned a minute ago, we have a lot of microclimates in Lake County, more than probably most places, because we don't have a lot of flat spots other than the lake. So if you have a lakeside property, for instance, the Buckingham Peninsula, you're not going to have any frost ever. And in that area, you can get away with planting any kind of citrus trees you like. No problem. So forget about last and first frost of the year. That's not even going to apply to you. However, most other places in Lake County, for instance, the Hidden Valley, and Jerusalem Hill area, which is where I live, has an average last frost date of April 15th. For me personally, that's our average last frost. And in recent years, I have to say that's moved even to the beginning of April. I'm not sure if that was just the last couple of years or if that is a tendency that's going to stay. In the Lakeport area, Lakeport, North Kelseyville area, the average last frost is May 15th. I'm sure you may remember, tribal health people, that either the last year or the year before, our opening garden celebration actually had to be canceled because there was a hailstorm on that day. So this just, reminds you that don't put your uh, tender summer vegetables out before that last frost date. If you do, keep some as replacements in the back because, if you're unlucky, then they may all be killed up to middle May. Then there's areas like Scotts Valley and Cobb where that is even more extreme. The average last frost date is anywhere from June 1st till June 15th. And in the same way, the first average frost in fall can be already in September in Scotts Valley. In most of Lakeport and North Kelseyville, it is mid-October. However, where I live, the first average frost is mid-November. So again, pay attention to your microclimate, and I can't emphasize that enough, keep a garden diary. If nothing else, keep a diary of the first and last frosts, when precipitation occurs in your area, how much, and any other real remarkable incidents. Now that we've talked about where to plant, we're going to talk a little bit about what to plant. It seems kind of a no-brainer that you want to plant vegetables that you like to eat. Of course, in some cases, that are going to be things that will not grow really well where you live. So, within reason, plant what you like to eat. What we always recommend for Lake County is plant short season varieties. Even though it gets brutally hot in the summer here, we actually have a short summer planting season. And that is because the summer planting season has nothing to do with how hot it gets. It is calculated by the amount of time that we have night temperatures above 50 degrees, 45 or 50 degrees. And as warm as it gets early here in the spring, or sometimes even in the fall, the time where we have reliable night temperatures in the 50s, which is what most summer vegetables need. Some of them even need 60 degrees soil temperature. So the only time where we have that reliably is about a 3-month window in the summer. And that's called a short planting season, regardless of how hot it gets during the day. So keep that in mind. And so the best way to make sure that you're gonna get your summer crop to fruition and actually get your money's worth out of it is to pick a short season variety. What is a short season variety? A short season variety is a variety that manages to get from seed to fruit, or whatever the part of the plant is that you want to eat, in less than 3 months. And the way you can determine that is when you buy a seed, when you buy seeds on your seed packet, it will always have the days that that particular, what we commonly call variety, the technical name is cultivar, cultivated variety, how long that variety takes from seeding to harvesting, that is marked on the seed packet usually. So that it will say either 50 days, 60 days, 75 days, up to 120 days. So when you have 5 tomato cultivars to choose from that you all would like to grow, and one of them says 55 days and the other one says 85 days, I would recommend to choose at least one that is a real short season variety. So even if we have a year with terrible weather, then at least the 55-day variety will manage to produce tomatoes for you. So that is always one of the things we recommend, choose short season varieties. Now, planting the amount your family will eat, that is very individually different depending on your family. I know families that don't eat hardly any vegetables at all. If the amount of vegetables you eat is the 1 slice of tomato or the 1 slice of lettuce in your burger, then you can get away with growing like 3 heads of lettuce at a time. But in my family, one person eats a half a head of lettuce per day. So for a family like that, you need to grow a lot more lettuce. So I find that the officially recommended amounts of certain vegetables per person that I find, like for instance, in our Master Gardener Handbook or in some online guides, are really not adequate for my family. They're probably adequate for the average American family with the average vegetable consumption. So just keep that in mind when you see one of those online guides. Your family may be totally different. And it doesn't even mention that in some families, well, some people just hate Brussels sprouts and love lettuce, and other people just love Brussels sprouts and hate eggplants. So every family and every person are so different. So when you use these guides, just take them as a really general ballpark figure. I find it much more helpful to actually make some notes of how much lettuce you like to eat and the other members of your family, and then multiply that by the summer season, and that will give you a much more accurate picture of what you need to grow. And a lot of you are going to laugh and say, well, my garden is not big enough to even grow 10% of the lettuce I eat. Yeah, that really is often the case. So then what you may want to do is grow those types of lettuce that you cannot buy in the store. Personally, for me, our family eats a lot of onions. I can never grow as many onions or garlic as we eat in my garden. So I already know I'm not going to be able to grow all the onions and all the garlic I eat in my garden. So what do? I grow only the kinds that you don't find in the store. And that is the case for a lot of the vegetables I grow. I know I will have to buy some extra. So I really focus on planting things that either I don't find in the store or that are really expensive in the store and actually really cheap to grow. Where the reason why they're expensive is because they take a lot of work, which doesn't cost me anything. So all of these kind of thoughts need to go in your planning. And if you say, well, all I have is 2 wine barrels that I can plant in, well, then just plant your favorite thing and enjoy watching it grow. And that's a good start. And you'll be amazed of how much greens you can grow into wine barrels if you do succession planting. That's something we'll get into a little more later. Now, the most important thing is that you want to plant, in addition to planting the stuff you like to eat, you want to plant appropriate for your season and your microclimate. To give you an example, a master gardener friend of mine from the past used to live down the road from me and was kind of used to being able to grow all the things that grow well in our area at the time when they grow well there. Then she moved to Cobb and didn't realize that you cannot plant the same things at the same time on Cobb than you can in Jerusalem Valley. It was a total different story. Her tomatoes and peppers never ripened. The potatoes that do terribly where I live did fantastic up on Cobb. So the greens did fantastic, but all the summer vegetables that are really technically fruits didn't do so well because she gardened under the shade of immense pine trees, which literally shaded half of her garden the entire summer. And she hadn't allowed for that little tidbit of information when she planted her garden. So appropriate for season and for your microclimate and for your hardscape, obviously. Using succession planting, I touched on that just a minute ago, is something I really love to do, especially with greens, because our fall, winter, spring planting season is actually a long season. We have a long season where we can plant greens, anytime from September, October till beginning to mid-May is when greens do really well. So instead of, like I did the very first time, I love lettuce. So instead of planting 100 heads of lettuce in September, which then all ripen by end of November, where you find yourself trying to give away 80 heads of lettuce because even a lettuce lover like me can only eat so much lettuce. I found out that it actually makes a lot more sense to plant like 5 heads of lettuce every 3 days. So 5 lettuce seeds every 3 days, staggering your planting. So then when it comes to harvesting time, 5 heads of lettuce will be ready to harvest at a time and not 100. And that is a good idea to do with many things, not just with lettuce. What I have here, what you see on my screen, is the vegetable planting schedule for Lake County. It is 2 pages. I'm just having arugula to greens The second page is greens to turnips. This vegetable planting schedule is in our Lake County gardening guides. And I'm glad that it reminded me to talk about those. We have two gardening guides for Lake County. We have a food gardening guide and a vegetable gardening guide that contain tons of really good Lake County specific information, including this calendar. You can buy those guides at our office on 883 Lakeport Boulevard. The phone number here is 263-6838 in the 707 area code. The guides each cost $12 and we'll be happy to mail them out to you for an extra $2 for shipping and handling. They are chock full of good information, including some of what I'm telling you today, but some things that I probably never get around to. However, if you don't want to buy those right now, you can get us to send you just this vegetable planting schedule as an email attachment if you call our office. Again, 707-263-6838, and we will email you that, because that is really the one thing. I think it took me like 10 years to put this together. And even now, as you can see, there are a lot of gray zones in there, because in Lake County, as in many places nowadays, the weather is not the same every year. So there's things that work really fantastic one year and they don't work in the next year because the spring is not the same every year, the fall is not the same every year. So the way this little schedule works is you see these black fields here. Black always means is pretty much guaranteed to work. Gray zone means it could work depending on where you're at and depending on what kind of year we have. So to give you an example, starting with the first crop, arugula on the left side is our first crop. To the left of arugula, it says W/C. That means warm crop or cold crop. In this case, arugula can be grown in summer and in the spring and fall. So it's a winter and summer vegetables, meaning warm and cold crop. That's why it has the WC in front of it. Then we have three different lines here. The first line says starting seeds indoors. And next to that line, you see a gray zone in February, a black zone in March, April, May, and so on. What that means is starting seeds for arugula indoors in February might be a good idea or might not, depending on the year. Definitely a good idea in March, April, May, and so on. Transplanting, the next line for arugula, is definitely a good idea in March, definitely a good idea in April, and so on. Maybe even a good idea still in October, maybe not, depending on the kind of fall. Direct seeding arugula on site may be a great idea in March if we have a fairly good March already. If we have one of those icy Marches that we had 20 years ago, then you may have to wait till April to direct seed arugula. So April is black, means will definitely work. So this is how that planting schedule works. And you will want to refer back to that constantly when you plan your planting. And like I said, we'll be happy to email it to you. Now, a few other things that go into your decision making when you select for plants, for what you want to grow and when you should plant it. Whether you want to grow something from seed or start with a transplant. In some cases, that really depends on your expertise as a gardener. I say in some cases, because some plants are so easy to plant from seed that you can virtually do no wrong. An example would be beans. Anybody, even the most beginning gardener, can plant a bean seed or a tomato seed. It's very unlikely that anything will go wrong and that you're not going to be successful. However, there's other more difficult, finicky seeds that take a little bit more experience, where you may be better off just buying a transplant at the nursery and starting with that. The advantage of that is also that nurseries start their transplants in greenhouses. as opposed to you on your refrigerator or living room floor or wherever you want to start those transplants. So the transplants you buy from the nursery are usually in better shape than most of the transplants we start in our house, because they have more light, they have even temperature, they have controlled growing conditions, and they're started by professionals. So for a beginning gardener, starting from transplants may be a really good idea. On the other hand, I can't tell you how much fun it is to just watch a seed grow from the moment you plant it to it's sprouting, that even for a beginning gardener, there's some things I would definitely start from seed myself, you know, such as tomatoes, beans, anything that has a relatively big seed, or things like radishes that are so easy that you can hardly do any wrong. Now, a lot of the information about plants, the cultivation information, whether you should start it from seed, when you should start it, how deep to sow the seed, whether to cover it with soil or not, is often on the back of a seed packet. You see that here on my screen. There is a seed packet from a reputable seed company, and there's actually a lot of information on the back of that seed packet. Even a beginning gardener, if you read the back of that seed packet, will do pretty well. There's other seed companies that sell their seeds with zero information on the seed packet, and part of that is either because they sell to generally more experienced gardeners and assume you know all that already, or they just want to save money, and because it costs money to print all that stuff, especially in 3 different colors on the seed packet. So in that case, you want to read up about how to grow this vegetable either online, or you want to, you know, get a book, call your master gardener program. There's all kinds of options. Or even better, get a mentor, somebody who is an experienced gardener, to show you. That is the ideal case scenario, of course. Some of the information that is on some of these seed packets and that you need to know is how far apart you want to plant, either the seed or even the transplant. It's really important. I can't tell you how many beginning gardeners I've seen that have thrown a bunch of beet seeds into their bed, and then they have 100 beet seedlings coming up in a 1 square foot space, and don't realize that they then need to be thinned to, you know, get the distance that the mature plant needs to grow. And they find out that they don't get really any beet roots, because these beets only have like a 1/2 inch per plant to spread. So all you're going to get is some spindly greens. So what you need to know is, how big does the mature plant look like? And that'll give you a pretty good idea how far apart you need to plant. So that can be an issue though. Let's say you only have 1 raised bed, which is 4 by 4 square feet, and you want to plant cabbage. A mature cabbage plant will take up 1/4 of that 4 by 4 square foot bed. And so you're going to think, is all I can grow is 4 cabbages? That is really kind of disappointing, right? Luckily, those 4 cabbages take a long time to reach that mature size. So what you can do is put those mature cabbages in the 4 spots that they are eventually going to occupy, but you can use all the space in between by planting some radishes, for instance, because we know that radishes only take like 21 to 35 days from planting the seed till harvesting the radish under ideal conditions. So you will have seeded and harvested those radishes in between long before those cabbage plants need all that space. And I do that with most of my beds. So I plant certain plants in their final place, but in between, I use all the space in between to plant things that only take half the amount of time to grow from seed to harvest. So that by the time these plants that take so much space are starting to size up, this other plant is already getting harvested, and then they can take all the space they need. So this is just something you learn as you go along, but I'm giving you that tip right now. Some plants have special needs. You need to create a trellis to support the mature plant. A good example are tomatoes, beans, or any other climbing vegetables, you know, melons, squashes. They like to be supported. Some plants need a lot more support than others. Cucumbers, for instance, like a lot more support than tomatoes because they are true vines. Tomatoes are not really true vines. So depending on that, you need to create a support structure that can be anything from a wire cage to just a pole that you then tie your plants to, or quite elaborate things. And if you Google around plant supports, you'll find all kinds of amazing things. I find that my number one favorite plant support that I use for almost every climbing plant is a cylinder made out of construction wire. The holes are 6 by 6 inches, so I can get my hands through to service the plant, harvest the tomatoes, harvest the cucumbers, whatever. And the plant then grows inside this wire cylinder. It'll also come out, of course, but you can push it back in. And if necessary, you can then put even a layer of bird netting on top of that wire cylinder. You can put a layer of shade cloth on top of it. You can reinforce that more as needed or not. That is one of my favorite supports. They last forever, basically, and are just so incredibly versatile. But people work with all kinds of other support structures. The other plant selection decision, the other thing to consider is soil, water, nutritional, and pH needs. An example comes to mind. Most plants actually, most garden vegetables like a pH of anywhere between 6.5 to 7, even sometimes up to 7.5, but that would be probably the upper limit for most things. Now, there are certain plants that need a much lower pH than others. Potatoes are a good example. Potatoes want their soil kind of on the sour side. And most Lake County soils are on the alkaline side, which many vegetables can tolerate, but things like potatoes, for instance, cannot tolerate. So they definitely will need to be grown either in trucked in soil or heavily amended soil to get it into that slightly acidic pH range. That is one thing that comes to mind. And there's a lot of other little tidbits, but that goes actually into the fertilizing class, not into the garden planting class. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. If you're a beginning gardener and if you think, oh, this is all kind of overwhelming, I don't know if I have suitable space for all these things. All I can say is herbs grow so well. Most herbs grow so well in Lake County. They're kind of a no-brainer for the beginning gardener. And most of the aromatic herbs do exceedingly well in summer here because it takes our intense kind of sun to form these aromatic essential oils in herbs like lavender, sage, oregano, you know, all the intense aromatic herbs. They love that intense sun to develop their flavor. There's only a few herbs that actually don't do well in Lake County summers, and that is things like, believe it or not, cilantro. Cilantro is not a heat-loving herb. It does actually really well in winter and spring in my garden. But you can get away with it in the shade. And there is one cultivar that's called Slow Bolt that you can actually still plant in Lake County summers and get it to make some material before it starts bolting. Even that Slow Bolt one doesn't really like our summers, but it does a lot better than all the other varieties. Then things like chervil, chives, parsley don't do super well when it's hot, obviously. So all the herbs you kind of associate with, you know, English cooking, New England cooking, Northern European, they don't do terribly well in the summer, but all the Mediterranean herbs do fantastic. And the other good thing about them is that they are all drought tolerant and they make fantastic pollinator plants. Once they get to the blooming stage, bees just love it. Bees love thyme, love oregano, love marjoram, love lavender and all that. So you are not just taking care of your culinary needs with those herbs, you're also taking care of your pollinators, which is a fantastic plus. So herbs are one of my recommendations for beginning gardeners. You can really almost do no wrong. Now, to get a little bit into the different gardening methods, square foot gardening is a method that was made popular by a guy named Mel Bartholomew. Of course, it's been around for much longer, but he was the one who popularized it and wrote the book about it. And all it is really a way to kind of visually help people to see, number one, how many plants you can get into your bed by dividing it up into square feet. And then there is this planting schedule that goes with it that tells you you can per square foot grow 1 tomato, 1 pepper, or 9 spinach plants, 16 radishes, 9 turnips, etc., etc., etc. My personal experience has been that this chart is not really quite right sometimes. For instance, 1 tomato plant, in my experience, needs more than 1 square foot to really thrive, unless you prune it all the time, because there's different ways of growing tomatoes. There's the way of growing tomato where you prune it just to 1 stalk, basically. In that case, 1 square foot is great. If you grow your tomatoes like I grow them, 1 plant per half wine barrel, that grows basically inside a wire cylinder and has multiple stalks, that tomato needs close to 2 square feet. So depending on how you grow your vegetables, that chart may not always be totally accurate. However, it's a general ballpark figure that's going to help you as a beginner. So besides letting you know how many plants you can grow per square foot, this square foot gardening method, what else is it good for? Well, honestly, it's mainly because of the psychological effect that you kind of have an overview, and it makes it doable psychologically. You know, it's for people who have a limited amount of space, so they can divide, for instance, a 4x4 foot bed, such as what you see here, into little growing zones. And they can say, okay, you know, I'm a person with limited physical strength. Today, I'm only gonna tend to 2 or 3 squares in my bed. So today I'm gonna do the bottom left 3 or 4 squares, and tomorrow I'm gonna do the bottom right 3 or 4 squares. And it kind of gives you an overview over your garden work. It makes the whole thing doable. That's one of the main benefits. Other than that, it's kind of a gimmick, you know, but whatever helps is a good thing. This picture that you see here is one of those very popular online garden planners that I used for a year or two in 2010 and 11, I believe, just because I wanted to try it out. Everybody was selling them at the time. And what you basically do is you rent the software for a year. I think at the time it was like $20 per year to rent that software. And then that lets you draw cute little tomatoes in your bed, and you can basically do something, you know, that normally landscape architects do. They draw cute little plans of your garden. And it was fun to do it. Honestly, I enjoyed it a lot. But after a year of using that planner, I realized it's faster and just as effective. Here you see, actually, in the next slide, this was my garden when I did the planner. Oh yeah, it was in the summer of 2011 when I did this one. And you can see I had these 2 large beds that were 4 by 20 feet. And, or was it 4 by 15 feet? I can't remember now. And then I had a whole bunch of half wine barrels. I have here like 10, 16, 17, 18, 19. I have 21 half wine barrels around these beds that I grew things in too. So here, this was a plan of part of my garden when I used the garden planner. And one of the main things I found this is good for is when you practice crop rotation. It really helps you to know what you planted in that spot the year before and the year before that and the year before that, which otherwise I would never be able to remember unless I wrote it down. so this planner is kind of nice to look at the next year and say, oh yeah, I had tomatoes in this bed, which means I don't want to plant tomatoes in the same spot again. Or I had peppers in there, which is in the same family as tomatoes. So you want to plant something that's in a totally different family in that spot, such as maybe kale. Here you see the other part of my garden here, when I used the garden planner, and it looks kind of cute. But then the next year, what I did, you can see here, is just a simple black and white drawing that was actually sufficient for my needs to know that, okay, this was the bed where I had peppers and tomatoes in. It says summer 2013, I had tomatoes in this bed, I had peppers in this bed. That was all I really needed to know. So I didn't plant tomatoes or peppers or anything else in the nightshade family in that particular bed for another 3 years, which is the minimum break you want to take from plants in the same family if you practice crop rotation. So I realized that for my personal needs, I don't need to have all these beautiful, colorful drawings. All I really need is a, pen or pencil drawing that tells me what I had in this bed. Nothing fancy, but I kept that and I could look it up the next year and it helped me make decisions. So to go to another I recommend actually when you make these drawings to use the square paper, because it really helps to get an idea of the scale. Like on this paper, I made every square inch is a foot in reality, right? So every little square is in reality a square foot. And that way I get a pretty good idea. This is a drawing I did for somebody's garden because I wanted to figure out how much irrigation lines I need, how many connectors, how many feet of line, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see I drew out the beds. They are 4 feet wide, 20 feet long. And the yellow lines here is the half-inch tubing, or in that case, it was 1/4-inch emitter lines. And that little plan helped me to figure out exactly how much irrigation supplies I needed. And then I could go to the store and check the price, and I could give the person a cost estimate of what it would cost to create a drip irrigation system for this little vegetable garden. So in the next slide, you can see my cost estimate. So I figured out I need 30 feet of half-inch tubing, 500 feet of 1/4-inch emitter line, 30 1/4-inch connectors, 30 1/4-inch goof plugs, 2 half-inch end caps, and on and on and on. And the whole thing, it would cost about $250 to create a drip system for a 30 by 26-foot square vegetable garden, just to give you a ballpark figure of what it costs to create a drip system. Now, this was in 2008. My feeling is it's probably going to cost a little more now, more than 10 years later, right? But even at the time, it cost $250 to put in an irrigation system into this garden. This is what plans are for. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you have you want to get 100 square foot growing space, and that growing space consists of 4 by, let's say, like here it's beds that are 3 feet wide and what do we have here, 10 feet long or so. In order to get that much growing space, the entire garden space actually needs to be bigger because you need spaces between the beds. And that is a really important thing. I find the number one mistake most beginning gardeners make is they try to maximize their growing space. So they say, well, why do I need so much space between beds? If I make the beds bigger and the walkways smaller, I can grow more stuff. And the experience, my gardening experience has taught me that if I don't leave enough space between beds, it makes it really difficult to walk in between those beds, which means I'm not going to want to do it. It makes it impossible to get a wheelbarrow in between. It means when I'm harvesting or taking all the spent crops out, if I can't get a wheelbarrow in there, that means I have to take a little satchel in there and carry every bit of stuff out by hand stumbling over the beds, stumbling into the beds. And if your beds are not framed like these beds, if they are in the ground and you don't have enough space, walkway space in between, you're going to end up constantly accidentally stepping on your bed, compacting your soil. You're ruining your bed that way. So for many reasons, to make it actually inviting for the gardener to work in that garden, I find it's totally worth it making a nice walkway that you can get your wheelbarrow through, so you can throw your harvested crops or even the spent crops for the compost in your wheelbarrow, wheel them out. It's going to make your work so much easier. You know, you don't have to like stand like a ballerina on your tiptoes, standing between your beds, trying to prune your tomatoes and accidentally falling in your bed while you're doing it. It's just, for me, what it comes down to is you have to honor yourself as the gardener, because that garden is not just a place where you grow vegetables. It's a place where you want to have fun. That is as important as growing vegetables. And you always have to keep that in mind. Doing things to make it more fun for you to work in there. And, you know, keeping the water close, the spigot close is one of those things to make it more fun for you. So you don't have to walk like 2 miles to get to the spigot to get water. These are all things that are important. A few more layout hints. So when you look at the picture on the top here, this is actually the new Legacy Tribal Health Community Garden in the top. And this is a picture I took when we did the opening ceremony. You can see Millie here in the picture and Sonia busy planting something. It's a beautiful garden. It's, you know, one of those perfect vegetable gardens that everybody would like to have, with perfectly spaced raised beds, with nice little borders where you can sit on when you're planting, beautiful mulch. It's just one of those perfect gardens. And I realize not everybody has such a perfect garden at home, but this is something just to strive for, right? So I put a picture in there. And they have nice wide pathways in between where you can put the wheelbarrow in between, where everybody, even if they're not really balanced on their feet, can stand in between beds without worrying about falling over. You can probably even get a wheelchair in there, I would imagine. I think it's probably wheelchair accessible, which is fantastic. So this is all layout things to think about, you know, make yourself comfortable while you're working, because if it's uncomfortable to work in a garden, you're not going to work in there. The other thing is what I found, you should not have a bed that's wider than 4 feet max. Because even in a 4-foot wide bed, I find sometimes when I service my tomatoes or prune things in a 4-foot wide bed, I have to lean over so much to get to the middle of the bed that after doing that for 2 hours at a time, I have horrible low back pain, which I don't have when I work on a bed that's only 3 feet wide, because the things in the middle are much easier to reach without stretching over that far. So things like that. I don't get quite as many vegetables out of a 4-foot wide bed, out of a 3-foot wide bed than out of a 4-foot wide bed, but it's so much more comfortable to work in it. So that is totally worth it to me. The tall plants, plants that get tall, you want to plant on the north side, obviously, of the bed, because otherwise, as they grow, they're going to shade all the other plants. Now, having said that, that may be a good thing in some cases, right? Let's say you're still insisting on planting lettuce in July in your garden. In that case, it may be a really good idea to plant that lettuce behind your tall tomato plants, because that's the only way it's going to survive without bolting, right? So what I'm saying is just use that knowledge to your advantage. Tall plants are going to create shade. Do you want that shade? If yes, where do you want that shade? So plant them where you can actually make use of the shade if you want it. And configure your rows or beds based on the available space. So in some cases, square beds may not work for you the way your garden is laid out. Nobody says a bed needs to be square, you know. This is just something that we have taken from farming because it makes things more efficient. It's easier to calculate the fertilizer. It's easier to calculate all kinds of things in a square bed, but it doesn't mean your bed needs to be square. In the bottom here, I put that picture in because I found that was in Santa Rosa. It was a house I walked by in Santa Rosa visiting some friends. And I thought this is a fantastic way to make a raised bed. And what that is, I'm not sure if you can see it, instead of wood or metal or other ways to make a raised bed, these are actually pavers. These are really big pavers. You can see the same pavers are at the bottom paving the ground, and they use the same pavers that they used for the ground to frame that raised bed. And those pavers are held together by big cables. Do you see those two big cables that are holding the whole thing together? It's a great way to make a raised bed. It will never rot. Those cables will never rot. It'll hold forever. And it's a way to keep the inside of the bed cool and warm in the winter, because those pavers are heat or cold sinks. So this is a great way to do a raised bed. That's why I put the picture in there. Now, talking about a bed not having to be square, I have been experimenting a lot last year with round, what we call keyhole or modified keyhole beds. I was trying to figure out what is the cheapest way to make a raised bed in Lake County without having to buy anything. And I found that the cheapest way to create a fantastic raised bed that I didn't have to buy a thing for. Now, I have to say I had some of these things lying around, and not everybody has those things lying around, but this bed cost me literally nothing. I went around to our shed where I had some old fencing, little shorter pieces of fencing that I had previously used to surround some fruit trees. And I cobbled together out of these wire fencing pieces a roughly 10-foot in diameter square round. And I lined that fencing with some old bed sheets, believe it or not. What you see here in this upper picture are some old bed sheets. So I put the bed sheets on the inside of the wire fencing. I just held them in place with old clothespins on the top. And then I filled this round thing, I forgot the keyhole. I put another, for anybody who doesn't know anything about keyhole beds, they were first invented in Africa. And they had more of a keyhole shape instead of being a total circle, meaning that instead of the circle being closed, you could actually enter it from one side, so you could easily access all the contents of the bed. In the center of that, in the actual keyhole, is a wire cylinder, or made out of wire or anything else people had on hand. This is where compost goes. So all the compost gets thrown in the middle of the bed. You're creating your compost pile in the middle of the bed, and all those good juices that flow out of the compost then flow from the middle of the bed into that bed, fertilizing your bed. And I have modified that concept here. So instead of making an entry to my keyhole bed, I only made it 10 feet wide. And since the middle is occupied by that composting cylinder where I don't really need to do anything except throw things in, I can still reach all the plants that I'm growing in there from the outside. So what I did is, after I created the wire round enclosure, I put another hardware cloth wire cylinder in the middle, which is the composting cylinder in the middle. And then I filled the bed to at least 2.5 to 3 feet high with mulch material. All the leaves from my oaks on the whole property, I had huge piles of leaves that I basically filled this thing with: oak leaves, little twigs, shredded wood, any kind of mulching material I could find. I filled it up to about a foot below the top. And then only the top foot, I put in good topsoil, because I knew I was going to grow greens in there. They don't have terribly deep roots. So I knew a foot of topsoil was going to be enough to get started. I filled the top foot with topsoil, and then I planted, as you can see, chard. And I can't remember what else I had in there, mostly chard. And I wanted to see if I could get that chard to survive the hot summers under the oak trees in my backyard. And it did. That chard did fantastic in that bed all summer long with 110 degrees in the shade. It was still looking like it did here in this little keyhole bed under the shade of an oak in the summer. So the only materials I had was the wire, the old bed sheets, the clothespins, the mulch that I got for free. And then the soil, I actually used the spent soil from an old bed that I had taken down in an area of my garden where I didn't want it anymore. So if you would have to buy that soil, that would be the only money you would spend, is basically the soil that you buy for the top foot of your bed. Now, as that stuff grows in there, the mulch underneath is slowly also turning into soil. And then once I harvest that chard on top, of course, everything has settled probably at least 6 inches in the course of that half year, which means I now need to apply more soil. No big deal. I apply 6 more inches of soil and plant my next crop in it. Or I could apply another foot of mulch and another 6 inches of soil and plant some lettuce in it. So this is, in my experience, one of the cheapest ways of doing a raised bed with, you know, what you can find around your property or what you can get for free from people. That's why I wanted to show you that. Now, all the good gardening practices to keep in mind when you're planning your garden. You want to plant a variety of crops. Even if you say the only vegetable I really like is broccoli, so why plant anything else? Now, even if you only like tomatoes, it's a good idea to plant something else. My experience has been, after gardening here for 15 years plus, 16 years, that every year, never fails, every year some other vegetable does fantastic and another vegetable does really poorly, for no reason I could have possibly anticipated. It's because the weather is different every year. Things happen that you can never anticipate. Even if you study the climate and do everything right, there's just always things happening in your garden that you are not going to be able to anticipate. And that's why you want to plant a variety of things, so you can make sure at least 2 of those things are going to do great. Because those different crops have different needs, which means if the need of one crop is not met, there's a good chance that the need of the other crop will be met. So something will be doing well. And that is really, in my opinion, the goal of a productive, successful vegetable garden, is you get some good eating out of it. The goal of a vegetable garden for me is not that every single thing I plant does fantastic. It's just not realistic to expect that. Even for good gardeners like me, it's not realistic to expect that. You have to count on a 10 to 40% loss with every garden you plant. That is normal, believe it or not. So don't beat yourself up and think, oh, I'm not a good gardener or whatever. There used to be a saying, I can't remember, I don't know if I remember it now, that they had in Europe. It was like, 1 for the mouse, 1 for the crow, 1 to die and 1 to grow. That's your garden motto. It means mice are going to eat something you plant, crows are going to eat something you plant, some things are going to die, probably from a disease, and some are going to live. And that's the reality in every garden. So expect a loss, plant more than you think you're going to need, plant a variety so that some things will do well. Oh, here, I even put my little saying in there. I forgot that I actually put it in there. So plan ahead for pest protection too. That's the next thing. You can be sure that you're not the only person who wants to eat the stuff you plant. That is a given. There is, in Lake County especially, we live in the wildland urban interface. That's what that's called, meaning there is lots of wild critters that love to eat what we plant. And in my garden particularly, I really live in the wildland urban interface. I live so far out in the sticks that with all the areas around me burning in the last 5 years, it seems like all the gophers and deer and other critters from 20 miles around have now congregated in my garden, because that's the only vegetable garden left. And that's where they come to eat. So I fully expect everything to get eaten if I don't protect it, which means that I have hardware cloth at the bottom of every raised bed it is screwed into the wooden planks of the bed with a screw every 1 to 1.5 inches, so nothing can get through. Then when I start my plants, I have netting or wire tops on the top, because if I don't do, the birds will eat the seedlings. Birds are some of my main predators, believe it or not. Once the wire comes off, then I put on floating row covers a lot of the time, which at least will make the stuff not so visible to the birds until it has reached a size where they really don't like it that much anymore. But I fully expect the stuff to get eaten if it's not grown in a cage. And if you live in the wildland urban interface, you should too. I mean, you may be lucky enough to live somewhere in downtown Lakewood where you don't have these issues, but if you do, prepare yourself. The other thing is every year is different, which I already said. Some things do well, why others won't. Sometimes it rains till June. Sometimes we already have 100 degrees in May. You never know how the year is going to be here. And so plant some things that will do well regardless of what the weather is like, regardless of how much water you have. And practice crop rotation to prevent disease buildup in the soil. This is especially important with tomatoes and all the nightshade plants. Tomatoes and all the nightshade plants, meaning plants in the nightshade family, have similar kind of diseases. So you do not want to grow plants from this family more than every 3 years in the same spot if you can avoid it. If you cannot avoid it, then one way to go about that is to just take the soil out and put fresh soil in, like in a wine barrel. You can grow tomatoes in the same wine barrels every year if you exchange the soil. No big deal. Can be done, right? If you don't do that, you're risking that you're carrying diseases from one year to the next. And tomatoes, as you know, if you have grown tomatoes before, have so many diseases, it's incredible. Luckily, most of them still produce tomatoes, even when they are diseased. That's the good news. But you can usually only get away with that the first year. The other thing I find that a lot of people don't plan for is they grow a fantastic summer garden and they don't realize that when that garden is ready to harvest, they're going to be out of town. You know, this is when they go on vacation. So make sure you know when your stuff is going to be ready to harvest and make sure you're actually going to be in town to harvest it. If you're not, then make sure somebody harvests it. Because if you grow a lot of vegetables that are fruits and you don't harvest it, what you're doing is basically signaling to all the critters in the area, hey, this is a good place to come for lunch, right? Or any other pests. Anything that's not harvested as soon as it's ready to harvest is really just an invitation to pests to come and eat it. And once you have them in their garden, they're hard to get rid of. Practice succession planting, I already touched on that. So the plants don't all ripen at the same time, especially with the greens. And I remember reading that Thomas Jefferson planted 1 lettuce seed a day, every day of his life, supposedly. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's a great idea. Now, in Lake County, you don't need to do that between the months of July and September, probably, but unless you do it inside. But the rest of the year, that is a good idea. The most important thing I found that actually made me progress from a failure to a great gardener in Lake County is a garden diary. I didn't start my garden diary till 2007, which is when I finally realized that I really need to do that. But then I have been keeping a garden diary from 2007 till now. It's over 100 pages and all my successes and failures are in there. And I have learned a tremendous amount from it. Basically, most of what I learned is because of my garden diary. And of course, the wonderful information we get from the university. But a lot of that information is not Lake County specific. So a lot of things I really needed to learn the hard way. And having learned a lot of things the hard way, I always try to save other people that experience. So keeping a garden diary, you will find out what exactly is possible in your particular microclimate, in your particular garden, you know, with a certain amount of guarantee that it's going to work. And that garden diary can just be a little notebook, or it can be some elaborate thing online with photographs and everything. You can make it as easy or as complicated as you want, just like the garden planning book can be as easy or as complicated as you want. Here, I want to mention a few of the things that you want to write down in your garden diary. Your location, you can put the GPS coordinates in there or not, but you know, you can just put in there Hidden Valley or Jerusalem Valley or, you know, downtown Lakeport, whatever. Then put in your last spring frost and do that every year. So you get an idea of when that usually happens. Your first fall frost, put that in every year. The first day of rain, the last day of rain, how much rain you got, how many inches you got per year. That's not in here, but that would be another additional piece of information I recommend putting in there. Any extreme weather events you had, like, you know, for instance, was it last year or the year before, that hailstorm in May? Was it I think it was toward the end of May when we were supposed to have our garden opening ceremony, right? That is an extreme weather event, and that's something that needs to be noted in the diary. So, you know, excuse me. So you know that this is something that you can expect where you live. The coldest temperature recorded on your property, the hottest temperature recorded, when that was, how long it lasted, your most productive crops, your least productive crops, your favorite ornamentals. Well, not that important for the vegetable garden necessarily, but what I recommend instead is your favorite pollinator plants. Last year, I really paid attention to which plants were most visited by the bees and by the other pollinators in my garden. And I found that one of those unsung heroes that doesn't look like much of anything that I actually was going to throw out was garlic chives. Garlic chives is not a super impressive plant. It doesn't look super impressive while it's growing. It doesn't taste super impressive. But once it makes flowers, it is being mobbed by bees, you know? And when I saw that, I thought, was I crazy to throw this plant out? So on the contrary, now I planted 10 of them in different places because this is an invitation for the bees. So pay attention to what ornamental plants or what herbs are the favorite of your pollinators and plant more of those in strategic places. If you want the bees to come to your vegetable garden, plant pollinator plants right next to it to attract them, because they're not necessarily going to be attracted by your vegetables. So write down what worked, what didn't work, your favorite experiment, your worst pests, the best, most spectacular insect visitors, maybe some beautiful butterfly you had, the biggest surprises you had. The biggest surprise I had this winter was I planted radishes, I want to say beginning of September in a bunch of I planted a bunch of wine barrels full of radishes beginning of September. And normally radishes, you know, only take like no longer than a month to go from seed to harvest. But I had filled these wine barrels with some soil that my dear husband purchased. Perfect organic soil, he said. It turned out to be like cement as soon as it dried out a little bit. Despite being organic, it didn't have a lot of organic matter in it. And these radishes did not like that cement-like soil. So after a month, they had made some greens, but not the slightest bit of a root was forming. After a month and a half, still same, radish greens, no roots. So I just forgot about them, and I thought I'm gonna just feed those greens to the chickens when I run out of other greens to feed to the chickens. Well, a week ago, or was it two weeks ago, when I came back from my little trip, I was gonna rip all these greens out and put some different soil in there and plant fresh lettuce. And lo and behold, those radishes had finally made radishes, roots. And there was the biggest, even though very awkward looking, because they had taken a lot of energy to drill down into that cementy soil, so they looked kind of funny. But it had made tons of radishes, and what really shocked me was I expected every single radish after growing, let's say, September, October, November, December, January. These radishes had been in there for more than 4 months. So I expected them to be completely unedible and woody. And guess what? They were tender and delicious. I was positively shocked. I mean, that was the least thing I expected. So that would be under my biggest surprise category. you know, something that wasn't going well, and I had already written it off, but I hadn't had time to take it out. And then in the end, it managed to actually make a crop and taste great. So what do you know, right? It's one of those things. So keep a diary so you can remember those things. Now, we're kind of coming toward the end. Since we don't have any live questions yet, I want to just make you aware of all the online planning tools that are out there. There are square foot calculators out there where you can find out exactly, you know, how many plants per square foot, what your vegetable spacing needs to be, and on and on. Seed starting date calculator, which you actually don't need really. If you use our Lake County vegetable planting schedule, you don't really need a seed starting calculator, but if you don't have that, you can use that. And if you don't remember that, it's on the johnnyseeds.com website, and this is not an advertisement from Johnny Seeds. There's many companies giving that out for free because they want to sell their seeds. So all that information is out there, and I have uploaded that whole presentation onto Google Drive. And if you need that information, we can send you all that in form of email. I just want to make you aware that all this information is out there online. So even if you don't have a book, you can look all this up, or you can call us and we'll email you particular things you need. There's also fun printable and things you can print out and fill out by hand, garden planners available. I was doing a little bit of searching on Etsy the other day because somebody had made me aware of that. There is like probably 20 to 30 different garden planners on Etsy that you can buy in PDF format and then print out and then fill it out by hand and make a little booklet out of it. Really cute with nice little drawings and everything. So if you're not a computer person, this is a great thing to do, you know, or you can just have a little notebook. One thing also that I didn't mention during this presentation, but I want to make you aware of is, if you live on a property that has serpentine soils, you cannot grow any vegetables in the ground. Don't even try. You can certainly put a raised bed on top and grow them in there, but you can't grow in the ground. If you don't know whether you have serpentine soils or not, you can find it out online, but that map online is not super easy to find, and I don't have the link right here. However, what you can do is call the Air Quality Management District. They have a very detailed map of the serpentine soil occurrence in our county, and they can tell you exactly, if you give them your parcel number, if you have serpentine soil or not, and where on your property it is. Their number is here, 263-7000. And this is how you can find out if you don't find that online map yourself. We also have that map hanging in our office. So that's another, you can come to us and we can look it up for you too. Then there's all kinds of, which you have already seen in my presentation, planning applications where you can have an online diary, an online gardening plan with cute little icons to put in your beds, little pictures of tomatoes and peppers and so on. And I did a little bit of a review here, but honestly, this is already a couple years old. So I haven't had time to go all over it again. So I'm not sure if it's totally accurate, but I can tell you they cost usually between $20 to $29 a year to use. It's a software that you basically rent for a year and use. And I find that some of it is so complicated that even a person like me who is very computer literate, it took me so long to figure out how to use all that, that by the time I had figured out how to use it, my gardening season was over. So if you're planning to use something like that and you're not a computer nerd, be prepared for a little bit of a learning curve. So definitely start out with a little handwritten booklet, so at least you have the information noted down until you learn how to use this thing. So that was it today. And I want to thank the UC Master Gardeners of Monterey Bay because I borrowed some charts from them. So thank you very much. Thankfully, in the digital age, we can do that now. That's really helpful sometimes, so I don't have to put this chart together myself. If you have more questions, do not hesitate to call us. Our helpline is 707-263-6838. This is also where you can buy the garden guides and have them send it to you. Right now, because of COVID, as you can imagine, there's not a lot of master gardeners in the office, but our office manager and secretary are in the office Monday through Thursday from 8 to 12. They will take your call and forward it to a master gardener, and we will get back to you. Or you can email us at clake@ucanr.edu. Same thing, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. You can also find us on Facebook. And at the bottom is our website that has a lot of useful information, plant lists to print out, etc., etc. And like I said, anything else you need, we're happy to email to you. So any questions, Louise? I think you need to unmute yourself. I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Do you see the little microphone icon? If you see that and there's a red.
Here we go.
Oh, now you're unmuted. Perfect.
No, it's all good. The only question. No, I don't have any questions because this is
okay.
Really
fantastic.
Very. I like one thing, but that's just for technical stuff. So
yeah. So as I already said, anybody who has questions, please don't hesitate to call us, email us. We're happy to get back to you with any specific questions about that. And we might even do this class again live on Zoom. And if you watch our Facebook, if we do it live again, we will announce the date on Facebook. And then you can ask your questions live. Otherwise, it was good to get all the information out. And I'm looking forward to getting feedback from people. I know this version is canned, but still, the feedback's going to be interesting. So I wish you all great success with your garden. Remember, even gardeners like us have failures, but you learn from it. It's a fantastic learning experience, and you get to co-create. I mean, there's nothing better to me, nothing more exciting than doing that. So looking forward to hear from you all.